Well, a very good evening to you on this Tuesday, the 18th of April, 2023, and welcome to Business Redefined. My name is Nina Shaban, and on this particular episode of Business Redefined, we shall be discussing the tax revenue overturn. Now, to just put this into context, we are about 3 months away from the closure of the financial year 2022-2023, and there is a deficit of about 715 billion shillings. Now, that means from now till the closure of this financial year, we need to come up, or rather KRA, the Kenya Revenue Authority, needs to collect about 178.6 billion shillings every month. Now, this may seem a bit of a stretch. So to discuss this, or rather to delve deeper into this discussion, we have Robert Maina, who is an Associate Director at Ernst & Young. A very good evening to you, Robert, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Nina, and thank you very much for having me.
All right. So the Kenya Revenue Authority is running behind its target for the tax revenue collection for the financial year 2022-2023. As at March 2023, it had collected about 1.4 trillion shillings. That means the deficit, or there's a deficit of about 715 billion shillings. Now, do you see KRA plugging this gap in the remaining period that we have, which is the next 2 to 3 months?
Well, thank you very much, Nina, for that question. Certainly, this is a very difficult achievement. If KRA manages to get this target, it will be very difficult. Granted, April, the end of this month, most companies are required to pay their final tax. So, and most companies in Kenya have December yet. So we expect quite a bit of tax corrections in the month of April. We might also have a bit of tax corrections, more than the average in the month of June from individuals who might be paying their final tax. So granted that those 2 months we might have a slightly higher tax correction than average, it will still be a very difficult task for KRA to meet the target. And I think this is a reality that probably the government is coming into terms with 3 months to the end of the year.
All right. Now, in your assessment, what do you think has presented a challenge for KRA in this financial year of 2022-2023, considering in the past 2 years, they have been overshooting the target, actually?
Yeah. I mean, for sure, I mean, we've seen a lot of progress in terms of tax corrections in the past 2 years. Tax corrections that have not been seen before. This year we've had the elections. They were in last year, August. So that has impacted. And it has been the case of Kenya, where the cycle has always, we tend to have a slowdown in the economic activities during the elections. So that has definitely affected the economic activities, and which then leads into lower tax collections. The other thing, we cannot escape that Kenya, we are in a global world. And we are very much interconnected, and for sure Kenya is one of the main countries in Africa that are very interconnected. So what is happening in other countries and the global slowdown, we have what has been talked about very many times, the war in Ukraine, disruption in the supply chain, the cost of goods have gone up. So that means if I have my disposable income that I have X amount, and I had money to spend on, let's say what I would say non-basics, probably don't have that. So the VAT that was being collected on those items is no longer being collected. So those factors, as well, so the local elections as well as the global dynamics, and maybe I think the other thing would be we've had recent changes in KRA, and like any organization, changes bring about uncertainty. So that could also have contributed to some extent in terms of the slowdown in the recent revenue collections. Yeah.
All right. Now, with that said, we're also in a dilemma where not only is revenue behind target, but also domestic borrowing is considerably behind target. So this has manifested in a sort of a cash crunch for the government. Now, what do you see should be or would be the way out of this?
Thank you for that. So one is, we only have 2 key sources of revenue for this government, and granted, one, tax revenue. So if we don't have tax collections, then the only other default is we have to go for debt. What you've seen is that when the Kenya Kwanza government came into place, they committed to reduce the budget by hooping 300 million. What that was expected to do is that there was expected reduction in the amount of debt that we get from both the local markets and as well as the international markets. And maybe that was partly informed by the fact that we needed to curtail or manage our debt intake on a continuous basis. So one, we will need to work on ensuring that we actually make maximum use of the resources that we are collecting, because otherwise the continuous, if we continue amassing additional debt without the growth, consequent growth in tax revenue, then we'll be in the same situation that we are in a few years from now. So in a way, I think we are not at the dead end where I would say that the government is completely unable to service. It's a matter of, we know in April there were a lot of local or domestic debt that was maturing the boards. So the government had to decide what exactly they had to do. And I think they opted to pay the debt and delay the payment of salaries by a few days, which I think is it's a better option rather than going to get additional debt to pay recurrent expenditure.
Okay.
Yeah.
And when it comes to that, how do you see, I just like for us to drift off a bit, that sort of balance, for how long will Kenya be in that particular situation?
One, I think as a country and as economy, we chose, the previous regime chose an infrastructure-led development. And certainly, infrastructure is it's quite expensive, and putting up the kind of roads that we have, the dams and all that, costed quite a lot, and which then required us to get a lot of debt. So the only way we can probably get out of this in the medium term, because this is not something we can get out in the short term, is trying to see whether we can actually now ensure that the investment that we made, we actually now have return out of that. And the return we can only get is making sure that we have additional tax revenue collections from this. Because I expect that if I put up a road, a major highway, and that opens up an entire economy in that area, anyone who is putting up, let's say, for instance, residential apartments, that's expected the residential rental income from that. Someone else doing some other form of economic activity, it is expected that that economic activity will yield into additional tax revenue. What may not have happened to date is that the massive investments we made in this particular sector, the infrastructure sector, may not have yielded as much revenue as we probably projected when we were doing this project.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. I hear you, Robert. Now, what's also interesting is that we're having this conversation at a time when the National Treasury is actually holding, or rather conducting, public hearings on the revision of the public debt ceiling. Now, what are your thoughts on the proposed shift from the 10 trillion shillings ceiling to the debt anchor?
It's obviously an interesting move, and we've had this discussion in the past. One is the fact that, if we look at where we are today, we've taken a couple of years moving the debt ceiling over the years. Every other year we have a request going to the parliament to increase the debt ceiling. Now, moving this to an anchor, which is pegged on the level of the GDP, might in a way help in terms of managing our debt levels. But the question is, for instance, if we have an economic downturn where the GDP does not grow as expected, and yet we still need additional debt to undertake certain projects, what then will happen? We will have an adjustment again to that anchor to accommodate our projects. So it's a good initiative, because I think the main metric that is used to compare a country's debt sustainability is the percentage of the debt to its GDP. So it's a good initiative, but yeah, we will have to observe how that is implemented going forward.
All right.
Yeah.
So I'd like for us to stay in matters debt. Now, here are some statistics that I collected. Kenya's stock of public debt increased by 1 trillion shillings between the 2021 and 2022. Or to be fair, between the financial year of 2021-2022 and the financial year of 2022-2023. Now, and this is partly due to the increased investment in infrastructure pursued by the government to improve both the economic and development growth. So what does this speak of the debt service cost as proportion to the revenue collection?
Well, our debt service is quite high. There's no doubt about that, and I'm glad that the current government actually appreciates that in the manifesto, that we are actually dealing with a very difficult situation. So when you're talking of $1 trillion, and you're talking of a budget of about 3.3, 3.6, give or take, so you're saying 30% of our budget goes into debt repayment. Now, our tax corrections, give or take, we are getting about 2 trillion, 2.2 maybe thereabout. So that means 50% of our tax correction. So for every shilling that is corrected by KRA, 50 cents goes to debt collection, debt payment. So that tells you that our debt portfolio is quite high. That's both the domestic as well as the international debt that we have. So with that, we have to agree that a decision has to be made. We either tighten our belts in the sense that we have to agree that certain projects have to be delayed, certain things have to be delayed. Otherwise, the only way we can achieve a situation where we are still continuing with the same nature of projects and, with the same nature of projects and the nature of development, we would have to accumulate additional debt. And I don't think this is sustainable. And I appreciate the debt the government has initiated this process of consolidating debt and trying to look at how we can manage our debt level. So it's quite high, and for sure, compared to our revenue collections, we need to work either on increasing the revenue collections, and I don't think we have the headroom in terms of additional revenue collections. It may not be as big as someone might be sitting out there might imagine that we can collect a lot of tax from the informal sector. Maybe not as huge as someone, practically that can be used to service the amount of debt that we have. Yeah.
And that has been the talk in town, actually. It's easy for people to say, just expand on the revenue collection. But we need to take a quick break right about now. We shall be back on the tax revenue ARTAN in just a bit. Let's take a quick break.
What made you decide to become a doctor?
It's because my father needed one. And you, what do you want to be when you grow up?
I want to be happy like you.
Life insured is love assured.
When it comes to pain, we only seem to talk about two sides. The pain you feel and the relief once it's gone. But what about the moment in between? When you're finally released from pain. That moment when you start to get back to ordinary, and ordinary feels amazing. Whatever pain you're going through, release starts here.
For an exclusive 3-time skin effect, try Nivea Men Deep powered by Black Carbon. For 48-hour deep moisture, a fresh skin feel, and a long-lasting masculine fragrance. Make an impact with Nivea Men Deep Impact Body Lotion.
We partner with communities across all 47 counties by advancing education, by enhancing healthcare, by supporting economic opportunities. Because when we unite, there's nothing we can't do.
My baby is famous for her happy dancing moves because she's always happy. What's the reason for this happiness? Molfix dryness. It's what all mothers dream of. Come on mothers, try Molfix baby diapers and be part of our happiness movement.
My name is Amos Kipruto, 2022 London Marathon champion. Watch this year London Marathon on 23rd April on MTV.
The London Marathon, 23rd April, live
on NTV.
You're watching Business Redefined in association with KCB Sahel Banking.
All right, welcome back. If you're just joining us, you're watching Business Redefined, and my name is Nina Shaban. Our conversation this evening is on the tax revenue outturn, and with me in studio is Robert Maina, who's an associate director at Ernst & Young. Now, to bring us back into our conversation, Robert, very quickly, the financial bill of 2023 is due in this month, before the end of this month, which is the month of April. Yeah. What are your thoughts?
Well, very interesting and something that everyone in the business world is looking forward to. We know when this government came in, they insisted that they will not increase the tax rates. They will seek to harmonize the taxes that we have. And this comes coincidentally when we have the finalization of the tax policy, which has been in discussion for quite a number of years. So one of the things that obviously every businessman who has probably been affected, and I know this has gone up to the level of the High Court, is we expect, and the President has pronounced himself on this, is that things like the VAT on exported services, that we expect at least at the very minimum, it should be exempt, but at the very best we expect it to be zero-rated. For sure, that's at the very minimum that we expect. The other thing that we expect is that we are looking at the nature of incentives, because with every government, they come up with their own policy. We've seen the government has identified certain critical areas that they want to focus on. For instance, the creative economy, digital superhighway, healthcare, and among others. So what we expect is that the tax measures that will be put in place will be aligned in terms of ensuring that where there are no existing incentives, then they will be granted to these sectors. And where there are probably incentives that probably are no longer in use, we might see a repeal of these incentives. Again, speaking of incentives, we've seen that the government came in, they talked of stopping all exemptions and all matters that have been handled by the Cabinet Secretary previously. We would expect that this will now be put into law. So if there are certain tax exemptions they feel that they should not be there, or they were not being granted according to what the government would expect, then we expect this will now be legislated, because what was issued through a notice may not be legally binding. So those are some of the things we expect to be addressed. Then a regulatory, from a regulatory standpoint, we would expect that where the government feels that the regulatory framework is not sufficient or there are gaps. We've heard of the Cabinet Secretary in charge of trade, Bona Moses Kuria, speaking of the various initiatives he is putting in place to foster trade and manufacturing sector. We would expect to see if there are amendments to various acts of parliament, then some of them might be passed through this bill.
All right.
Yeah.
Now, I'd like for us to go back on the VAT, on that's value-added tax on the exported services. Now, to expect them either get zero-rated or exempted, what position will this place a KRA in, considering that it's struggling with VAT and the VAT refunds, and what incentive would it have to have them zero-rated?
Okay, thank you very much. So one of the things is that in terms of export of services globally, and in very many countries, other than a few countries where you will find that export of services is subject to VAT, it is globally accepted that export of services is not subject to VAT. And in most cases, it's actually zero-rated. One, let's appreciate that Kenya, we pride ourselves in terms of having the best services. We have people with expertise who are able to export these services to other countries, and they will do that while seated in Kenya. Our financial sector here, we have people who are seated here and they're providing advisory services to very many other countries. We have, the media across all sectors. Kenya, we pride ourselves of having talent. Now, if you ask someone to levy VAT on a service they are offering to another country, they are obviously making them non-competitive, because someone would obviously go to another country other than adding a 16% cost. And I think that has been expressed in very many platforms, and we hope this is implemented. Now, before July last year, we've never had VAT on exported services. And this was introduced probably because of one reason or the other. We've not had a very good reason being given by the government. It's probably, some say it was actually an error. So we hope this is done, because as much as we talk of tax corrections, we must also protect the business environment, which then derives other taxes such as other taxes such as corporate income tax, employment tax, just to ensure that we continue to ensure that Kenya is a hub for anyone looking to invest in Africa.
Okay. So I'd like us to shift gears to take a look at what's going on in the digital services tax, yeah? So what does the proposed change of the digital services tax, which is shifting it to the 2-point pillars, mean for the tax revenue collection, from where you sit?
From where I sit. I think when you look at what the Kenya Revenue Authority decided through the Treasury not to become a signatory of the 2-pillar model when that was released. Probably the government, and I think they just wanted to test and see how much they can actually collect by having an unilateral decision where we are charging tax on income derived by these multinationals. Now, if we shift away from the unilateral taxation of these multinationals, that means we'll now have to comply with the 2-pillar model. That requires us to abolish income tax. Obviously, I think it's also good to differentiate that from a digital tax perspective and digital service tax perspective. We have what we call the income tax perspective, and you have the VAT. VAT is basically meant to ensure that you have a fair playing ground, because if someone who is in Kenya is offering the same service, they'll be required to charge VAT.
Yes.
But from an income tax perspective, then that means that all income tax related, that was initiated, and in Kenya it's only the 1.5%. So moving to the 2-pillar, we will need to see how much we'll be able to collect, because again, this one has a threshold. In Kenya, we know at the moment, any multinational, whether you are making just $1 million Kenya shillings, if you are within the category, you are supposed to pay tax. Within the 2-pillar model, there is a certain minimum threshold. So the question is, maybe certain startups may not be caught within that, and you need to compare how much you are making out of the 2-pillar versus this one. But I guess it's something that has sailed. The boat has sailed, and we may not afford to be left behind as a country.
All right. And Treasury has also hinted at the resumption of the presumptive tax. Given that it failed in 2018-2019, what can be done differently to make it work this time, according to you?
Now, presumptive tax, obviously we've had thoughts on how the informal sector can be brought into the ambit of taxation. And I think one of the ideas that has been floated is the issue of the presumptive tax. This was there many years ago, and I think that was abolished. There were reasons that informed that. Now, I know this is an attempt by probably the government to see how they can bring into the ambit of taxation the informal sector. There has to be, the thing is, there is a lot of the informal sector. We have a lot of businesses that tend to, they are discouraged from formalizing, some of them, because either they feel that they'll probably be paying a percentage of their revenue, because in most cases you find this kind of tax will be levied as a percentage of the revenue, or as a metric based on a certain metric, not your net profit. And that means that unless it's levied in the right manner, and there is enough consultation and we target specific players, then we will still have the same challenge that we have, because we have turnover tax at the moment, yes, which is 1% of your turnover. That is essentially supposed to be paid by the small players. Probably, I don't know the success. We've not had a lot of success, or we've not had a lot of statistics on the success of that. And maybe that, I hope the government will have learned from how the turnover tax has performed when imposing another tax, which is more or less similar to that. Yeah.
All right. And another matter that maybe we need to look into, the Court of Appeal threw out the minimum tax, but KRA has actually taken this matter to the Supreme Court. Could we likely see a return of the minimum tax in one form or the other in the Finance Bill of 2023?
Yeah, it is likely, because I think when you think about the main reason that drove the introduction of minimum tax there was in the government circles, there was a feeling that or a perception that certain businesses operate for many years without necessarily paying corporate income tax. Now, arguments have been put forward that while this businesses may not be paying corporate income tax, they are paying other forms of taxes. They have employees who are paying PAYE. They also acting as agents, meaning they are charging VAT. They are also acting probably as agents. They are deducting withholding tax and all that. So there are other taxes that might be applicable, but the main focus has been whether they are paying tax on their profit. Yet they've been operating in the country for a number of years. I think if minimum tax is adjusted to accommodate the views that were put forward by various stakeholders, it can be implemented in one way or the other. Looking at what has happened in other comparable jurisdictions in Africa, it is possible that that can be put in force, but with relevant sections that are accommodating the issues that were put forward by the players.
All right. Well, we could go on having a discussion on tax over and over again, but unfortunately we have run out of time. Robert, thank you very much. This is Robert Miner, who's an Associate Director from Ernst & Young. We were having a discussion on the tax revenue pattern, and this has been Business Redefined. My name is Nina Shaban. We have come to the end of the show. Thank you so much for keeping it on TV. I'll be seeing you later on in our 9 p.m. bulletin for the business section. Please do enjoy the rest of your viewing.